Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled A 2025 Emergency Calling Playbook. My name is Robin Urkla, and I'll be the host of today's webinar. I'm Bandwidth's Emergency Services Solution Engineer and acting as a Bandwidth subject matter expert for you today. Joining me is Erwin Lazard, President and Principal Analyst with Metrigy.
Hi.
Hey, Erwin. Glad to have you here. Before we begin, I just need to cover some of the housekeeping reminders. All lines are muted to prevent any background noise. Please enter all questions in our Q&A box at the right of your screen. We'll reserve the questions for our Q&A session at the end of the webinar. You're going to be receiving a recording of this webinar over the next few days, so be on the lookout for that. Finally, the fine print: neither Erwin nor I are lawyers. We're not giving any legal advice on this webinar today. Our lawyers just make us say that. All right, let's begin. So what we're going to we're really going to dig into three topics today: key trends to anticipate in 2025 around emergency services, how to prepare for NextGen 911, because that's one of the big key trends, and then streamlining for multi-platform management as we dig into this. So first and foremost, let's talk about four key trends that we're seeing as we anticipate 2025. All right, the first trend is really all about AI, right? We're all hearing about AI. AI is reshaping everything. I was just at a conference at the first part of the year for public safety, and there was 400 or 500 of us that got together, and we were talking a lot about AI, even how AI is impacting in public safety and especially emergency communications and emergency services. And a lot of people are going, wow, do we really want AI in emergency services? I don't want AI answering my 911 call. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about how AI can have a significant impact in process, assistive efforts with call takers and other things. And so, Erwin, yeah, you got some great data on this, and I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think you set the stage really well. We're seeing AI obviously everywhere right now. It's the topic that comes up in just about any conversation around communications, collaboration, software in general. But I'd say the first area that we're seeing organizations realize tremendous benefit and measurable ROI has been around improving customer engagement and specifically in the contact center. And I think you'll start to see this come into the emergency services calling area as emergency call centers begin to look at, how can we leverage what is available to us in AI to improve the ability to diagnose challenges that come in, to respond to people, to have an automated coach or assistant that's helping an emergency contact center agent or emergency call center agent give the right advice, to coordinate different kinds of responses. And so what I wanted to share was a slide from a study that we published last year, where we went out to roughly 1,000 IT business contact center leaders and asked them around how they were using AI, specifically in the customer service arena. And we found a number of areas across the board. The majority of organizations now are using AI, but having that ability to train and coach and provide real-time feedback to operators, again, really critical opportunities to do that within a call center that's involved in life-saving activities. Optimizing the workforce, so ensuring that people are scheduled properly, that you've got the right people assigned to the right roles, that you improve the ability for them to engage with the applications that they're using. Maybe even we're hearing a lot of terminology now around agentic AI, which might automate some capabilities, and then improving the hardware, improving voice and video quality and translation quality. Even removing accents is one use case that I've seen. Capacity planning as well. So I think we're on the cusp of this huge opportunity to leverage AI within the emergency call centers to drastically improve the way we become more responsive to calls that come into a 911 operator.
Yeah, agreed. I think 911 call centers are talking about these things you're mentioning here. We show here on the screen. The two things I'll highlight is some of the conversational AI type stuff, translations, right? There's a big push to how do we streamline it and take better advantage of AI to provide a better experience for 911 callers when we have to translate a foreign language, right? So that I think there's a big deal there. The other thing is coaching, right? For a long time, we've tried to measure the performance of 911 call takers or telecommunicators through various different facets. And I think this is going to help, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right. The next trend. Trend number 2 we're going to talk about is preparing for new regulations. So first and foremost, Kerry's Law and Raybaum's Act. I don't want to spend a lot of time here because these have been around for many years. We're all kind of aware of them. They're still quite relevant. The one thing I'll say, and I don't mean to steal a little bit of your thunder, Erwin, but the one thing is Erwin and I've talked about recently is there's still some adoption to go with these two. So when we look at 2025, I expect to see some more adoption of people of services to be able to comply with Kerry's Law and Raybaum's Act, otherwise known as the MLTS regulations from the FCC. Any comments before we move on here, Erwin?
Yeah, I think we'll get into some of the lack, I guess, at this point still of compliance that organizations are still, we like you said, we've been talking about this for a while now. The laws have been on the books since 2020, I believe was when they were enacted, with enforcement dates going into effect in 21 and 22. And yet the fact is, years later, we still are at a situation where organizations still struggle around what it means to be compliant. They may feel like they're grandfathered into older systems. They may not really know what questions to ask of their providers, and they may have challenges, as we'll talk about, in ensuring consistency across different locations, different regions, geographies, et cetera.
Yeah. So more to come on this, but next thing is there is actually 3 big ones coming out right now. We're going to talk about 2 right now, and then we have a whole section of the webinar dedicated to NextGen 911 that we'll get to here in a few minutes. But the 2 big ones that a lot of people are talking about right now are the FCC Order 2288, which is PSAP outage alerts. I could spend hours talking about this, but the bottom line here is that come April 15th, originating service providers have to deliver notifications or alerts to affected PSAPs if they're going to have an outage or a potential outage that affects 911 calling into that particular PSAP. So this is going to be a very interesting thing. It's been a long road to get here. When you look at the order there at 2288, the order was actually for the notice for proposed rulemaking actually came out in 2022. It took over 2 years for us to get this all put together. Us being the public safety community as a whole, FCC, there's a lot of comments. Long story short, it's here now. Come April 15th, PSAPs can expect to start seeing testing and a lot of new alerts coming their way about outages or potential outages. And then the next one is Alyssa's Law, right? It started in Florida. There's a lot going on around this. We see a lot of other states starting to adopt something like this around being able to connect first responders with like schools or campuses that are having some sort of emergent situation, maybe an active shooter situation or something like that. What are you seeing around Alyssa's Law there, Erwin?
Yeah, it's really starting to gather a lot of discussion. Initially, as you mentioned, it's a requirement that came out of the tragedy at Parkland High School or Parkland Stoneman High School in Parkland, Florida, that is requiring schools to have essentially a silent alarm where a teacher can press a button if there's an incident in the school, and that would trigger a call out to 911. And I think organizations are really struggling with how to implement that. There are 7 states where there's an Alyssa's Law variant on the books today, 12 more where it's coming. Wouldn't be surprising to see federal law at some point. It wouldn't even be surprising to see something that entails more than schools. So maybe other types of workplaces, hospitals, public areas where there have been unfortunate incidents that may be required to have these kind of systems in the future. And I think the big challenge that organizations face is, how do I integrate this into my existing 911 strategy? We talk about 911 calls requiring a dispatchable location, the ability to call back. If you're sending a silent alarm, it's not a voice call. So what kind of information gets transmitted to first responders? what kind of on-site notification happens in the event of that call. I think these are all challenges that organizations who are subject today to Alyssa's law are having to work out. And then, you can expect to see similar types of adoption of solutions, even in states where it's not mandated, simply because it makes sense from a safety perspective.
Yeah, and I'll say a lot of these laws say what you have to do, not how you have to do it. So then some counties, I can vouch for this. We've worked with several counties in Florida where some are saying, let's take it in through, let's leverage the 911 system to notify first responders. And then others are going, no, we're going to create something wholly new to do it. So again, there's a lot of challenges out there, a lot of variability out there. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this progresses. Taking just a quick reality check, though, we were talking about, complying with all this stuff. So, like I said, I didn't mean to steal your thunder before, but yeah, let's talk a little bit in more detail here about what compliance looks like today, because it's still very interesting.
Yeah, we've been tracking it for the last 4 years, and our annual research just comes from a study of about 400 organizations, and looking specifically at North American companies for this particular chart. And the needle is not moving. We showed this year about almost 64% of organizations that told us we think we're fully compliant with both Kerry's Law and Rebounds Act. Looking at my notes here, that's up from only 57% in 2021, which was the first year that we gathered that data. So we haven't seen a large transition, and you'd hope this would be closer to 100% by now. There are about 8% who say, well, we're only compliant with Kerry's Law, but we haven't become compliant yet with Rebounds Act. Roughly the same who say the reverse, compliant with Rebounds, but not with Kerry's Law. 7% still say we don't think we need to be compliant because of the letter of the law that says that it is required, compliance is required for new installations, new installs, upgrades, and so on. 12% don't know. They just don't have insight into whether or not they're compliant. It's not something they've looked at. And so in not only in our research data, but just our conversations and our work with enterprises, we still find a lot of confusion around what it means to be compliant, what the impact is on legacy systems, and who's responsible, who owns the budget for making sure that there is compliance.
Yeah, it's amazing that we are, the deadline for this was several years ago, and we still have a lot of people self-reporting that they're not compliant with this regulation. I personally, I don't think there's that many old Nortel phone systems out there. I really don't. But anyway, all right. So next trend, number 3. Return to office announcements. I mean, let's face it, Erwin, you live close to DC or in DC, right? There's the whole federal government thing, but I've heard a lot of these announcements coming from a lot of the different large organizations out there, Google, so on and so forth. There's a lot of big companies out there that are saying, nope, it's time to come back to the office. Let's go.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. We gathered data as part of our study of about 400 companies. We found about 37% are requiring people to be back in the office a certain percentage of days per week. We found roughly 20% that require people to be back full time. The rest are either, it depends on your role, or maybe employees have the option to decide whether or not they want to come in the office. But it really makes things complicated from a 911 perspective. If we think about sort of the two goals of a 911 strategy, is making sure that you get that call to the right PSAP or emergency call center, and you do so with the right user location. Well, that user location may be home on a Monday and in the office on a Tuesday and at a hot desk on a Wednesday and working from a common area on a Thursday, and so on. Giving you that example, it may be access to a desktop phone one day, maybe a mobile phone is the only device, or a soft phone with a headset is another day. And so, the old way of mapping wall ports and phones to office locations and keeping a centralized database really doesn't scale to this new world where people are working in not only, again, home and an office, but potentially lots of different locations. We found roughly half of our participants now support hot desking, where people no longer even have a fixed workspace. We're seeing at the same time a mixed environment. We'll talk a little bit more about this, where around cloud and on-prem is still a hybrid environment in many organizations. We talk about the challenges of an effective 911 strategy when people are using mobile phones often as their primary phone. And now we're seeing, we'll talk again a little bit more about it around the rise of mobile phones as a part of that enterprise calling platform. So, the bottom line is if you're responsible for making sure calls get to the right operator with location information, the world has gotten really complicated and is getting even more complicated. And, as we look at the chart that I have on the screen right now, people aren't really comfortable with the return to office strategy that they have, and they're anticipating change next year. We hear from companies who brought people back and said, you know what, this isn't working. Why am I bringing people into the office so they can just sit at their desk and do the same thing they were doing more effectively at home without spending 2 hours a day commuting? Or, we feel like maybe we don't have people back in the office a little bit. It's only 42% of our participants that say, yeah, we don't think we're going to change anything next year. The rest are still in a state of flux. And again, if you're responsible for a telecom, it continues to get more complicated for you.
Yeah, I can vouch for this. Yeah, there's a lot of companies I get to talk to who are in that, obviously more than 50% are in this state of flux, and they're trying to figure out what to do here. And I like to, when we look at the Ray-Bombs Act and these regulations that came into place years ago, they talked about fixed and non-fixed endpoints. And this predated the pandemic, right? It all came out before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and we're like, everybody's picking up their phones and going home, and they're trying to deal with that. And so I always look at it in terms of on net and off net, with these enterprise phone systems. When you're on net, it's more easy, if I may, where you can track where the users are and what cube they're in, what phone they're using, and so on and so forth. But when they're off net and they go home and they're at a Starbucks, you got to throw out the Starbucks thing, right? When they're at a Starbucks or a hotel or whatever, the common the common best practice I'm seeing today is allowing the end user to provision their address, but only in certain circumstances. So you're right, Erwin, this gets really complicated. It's really interesting. And the other thing you brought up was about cell phone usage, right? A lot of people are using cell phone usage. So we're seeing that as another big trend we're calling out in 2025 is mobile calling and the associated, trends with that mobile 911 calling and the associated with, issues or challenges with that. For example, this is a big thing right now is being able to establish geofences. This is a lovely picture of the bandwidth headquarters in Raleigh, North Carolina. And the idea here is we could geofence different areas of the campus so that, there's technology out there right now today where if somebody calls 911 on their cell phone, we can get kind of a Kerry's Law type notification at the front desk that somebody from the fitness center or somebody, out in the daycare center had to call 911. And then, that's only going to help. Kerry's Law is there for a reason, right? The notifications, all that stuff is there for a reason, but there's a little bit of a gap with mobile calling here. I think this is really exciting to see this geofencing type technology come into play that kind of bridges the gap here. Makes sense, Erwin? What are you thinking?
I think it's critical. We've seen in our research a lot of interest in fixed mobile convergence solutions. Typically, historically, those have been dual SIM. So I provision a second phone number on your personal mobile device. You can use that for business calls, and maybe that becomes your primary one. But now we're also seeing solutions like Microsoft Teams Phone Mobile that allow you to essentially register that mobile phone as a Teams endpoint. So you're using the native dialer. That device is typically going to be managed by your company. The challenge is, again, if I use that phone to dial 911, I think 85, 90% of 911 calls come from mobile phones these days, that you've now taken that call typically off net. The carrier handles it just in the same way they would any other mobile call. So there's no front door notification. There's no guarantee of knowing exactly where that call came from. So when the first responders show up at the front door, in this example, maybe at that front desk and security that you show on the diagram of your campus, are they going to know that someone used their personal mobile device or company provision mobile device to call for help from the fitness center? Probably not. And so that creates a gap and a need to address that. And again, using some of the solutions that are out there, like geofencing that you talked about.
Perfect. Yeah. All right. So I know we kind of talked about the four things. There's really 5 big key trends we're talking about in this, and we're going to spend the next few minutes really dedicated to one of the big ones, which is all about NextGen 911, right? And what's going on there. And so to help the industry along, The FCC did a report and order this last year. You know, there's all kinds of numbers flying out there, 21,479, all these different numbers. But the bottom line is they're trying to encourage adoption of NextGen 911, right? And when you look at the 911 landscape, the FCC can regulate for originating service providers and the carrier side of the business. The FCC can't regulate on the 911 network and the PSAP side of a 911 call, right? There's really a whole spectrum of how a 911 call works here. And the FCC, you know, so in the interest of trying to spur on adoption of this, we've been talking about NextGen 911 for a long time. And so to spur on that adoption, they passed this this report and order, and basically there's two phases to it. And what it basically says is that if a 911 authority, and that can be a state level, that can be a county level, or some sort of regional in between, when the 911 authority is ready to really roll out NextGen 911, and they've got their NextGen network ready to go, they can give notice to originating service providers and say, hey, you need to connect to these two redundant IP connecting points in our network and send us all the 911 calls that way. You got to do that. And then phase two is all about sending location in the way NextGen 911 intends it, which is locations included with the call over a voice over IP call into these NextGen 911 networks. So this is the FCC's approach, is to require this this kind of you know, they're trying to spur on this adoption, give a little bit of teeth, if you will, to the 911 network providers out there and the authorities to go, hey, OSPs, you now have to deliver to us in a 911 or NextGen 911 fashion.
Yeah, and I think it's great that we're finally seeing this. You know, we've been talking about it for a while. We renamed our panel last year at Enterprise Connect to focus on NG911, and you know, really sort of telling that message that even though it's been around for a while, now is the time. Now is the time to start getting ready. And you know, if we hop on to the next slide, you know, some of the challenges that we're seeing organizations facing is a lot of 911 connectivity still happens over TDM or analog lines in some cases. You know, we see that in our study, roughly 17% of companies that are not making any changes to their existing POTS line service, even as internationally regulatory bodies move to phase out POTS. Here in the US, it's more of a deregulation, allowing carriers to charge what they feel the market will bear for it versus having to provide those at a loss. And so if you're still relying heavily on analog and digital connectivity, you know, you're not well positioned, as you talked about, the need to make sure that you have IP connectivity, and also that ability to, you know, transmit a whole lot of additional information over that connection as you're connecting into an emergency call center.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Erwin, which is that the promise of NextGen 911 is not only just about improving the reliability and the capabilities, well, improving the reliability and the voice capabilities of a 911 network and for 911 calls, but also being able to support the sharing of data and better information, multimedia, all those types of things, not only to the first responders, but to, you know, to the PSAPs themselves and so forth. And so when we look at the transition to 911, it's underway, right? I can tell you that bandwidth, we've been, you know, before even this FCC report and order came out, we already have IP connectivity into several states and several regions across the country that we're working on. And this is just going to spur on more of that, which is fantastic. I mean, you know, as you said, TDM connectivity is getting very, very expensive. We all want to see it go away. How can we embrace this and take advantage of the resiliency and all the stability that can come if it's implemented properly with a NextGen network? But then number two is all the stuff about additional data and multimedia and all the good stuff that we want to see, and you know, and better location information that comes along with that as well. So I'm excited about, you know, I'm actually excited about this ruling and how hopefully it spurs on some adoption.
Yeah, same here. And I mean, I know you've been heavily involved in the standards bodies, and you've done a lot of work here. So it is rewarding to see that we're finally moving into the reality phase versus the hype and the promise phase, right?
Yeah. So some of your research into this shows that yeah, there's a bit going on with NextGen 911.
Yeah, as part of our study, we wanted to understand, are people responsible for telecom aware of next generation 911 plans, and not only NG911 here in the US, but NG911, NG112 in the UK. There's similar effort. I'm sorry, in the EU. There's similar efforts underway in the UK, Australia, New Zealand. So we're seeing, this global effort to modernize emergency calling versus just 911. But we found about 42% of organizations that were at least aware and had started planning for it, which is astounding. It's really good news. But another 28% that at least were aware of it, even though they hadn't yet started planning. And only 14% said they didn't really know anything about it, or they were unsure, another 16%. So at least it tells you that the message is starting to get through, that organizations are at least starting to put a plan in place that would say, who do I need to get involved? How do I coordinate, something that had been traditionally a voice telecom centric activity, and now pull in facilities and pull in video teams, AV teams, other information that might be necessary to share with first responders, or beneficial to share with first responders. It drastically changes the way people think about emergency response in their organization.
Yeah, I can tell you, it's still a spectrum. Some people, we talk about this and they go, what is Next Gen 911? But more and more and more, I'm having people go, yeah, why can't I send a picture right now? I want to send a picture to Custer County, Montana. Why can't I do that? And so there's a lot more awareness. And so speaking of which, we've got just a few ideas here on key considerations for you that might be listening in the audience about next generation 911 success. What might you want to look like? And I don't want to read through this, but we've already talked about some of these key things, like transitioning from POPs to, from the plain old telephone system and PSTN to SIP and TDM, all that to IP. That's fantastic. I think one of the key ones here is the first one: coordinating among facilities, security, IT, telecom teams. When you look at a 911 call, right, and it spans an originating service provider through some sort of 911 aggregation network, like bandwidth typically, and then through into some sort of 911 network itself, whether that's a legacy selective router or a new next gen network, and then into the first or into the PSAP, and then finally data and information gets out to the first responders. That's a lot of silos. That's a lot of links in the chain, so to speak. And there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen so that we can have an end-to-end next generation 911 IP phone call. What are the other things that stick out to you here, Erwin?
Yeah, I think that's really the big one, is making sure you've got the right organization in place with leaders and who are coordinating among all the different involved parties. I think understanding what the capabilities are of your telecom providers, your both legacy, potentially on-prem cloud providers, and then really harmonizing that PSTN access strategies so that you can ensure consistency across all different locations. If you've got an NG911 strategy that works well in the US, but you haven't really thought about subsidiaries or office locations in Europe, you're kind of missing part of the problem there. And so ensuring that you're working with groups and companies that can help you ensure consistency across all locations, I think is really critical. And then, really thinking about how this is going to continue to evolve, staying on top of what's happening within the standards bodies that you mentioned earlier, the different regulatory authorities, I think is another critical aspect.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff emerging coming out here relative to Next Gen 911. I mean, the standard for what we call the I3 standard and all that stuff has been around for quite a while, but it's constantly evolving. So the second to last item here is be ready to evolve as next generation capabilities evolve. I can't highlight that one enough either. I mean, it's going to be evolving significantly. We see, for example, just one example is when we first started in the context of 911 several years ago, developing the facilities to be able to allow different PSAPs to communicate with each other during, during some sort of emergent situation, some sort of emergency. The idea was that, we started out with this thing called EIDD, Emergency Information Data Document, some sort of data document that can be shared at a technical level across these different organizations. Well, that EIDD is already out the window. Now we call it EIDO, Emergency Information Data Object, right? It's already evolving as we start talking about, as technology evolves and as we learn more what needs to happen here, what's going to happen here. And I think I'm going to call it right now. I think that both the PSAPs, the way telecommunicators operate today, is going to have to change a little bit. And then, the way we share data with first responders is going to change quite a bit. So we're going to see various combinations of that across the country, which is really exciting to see. Hopefully is again, the whole idea here is to help save more lives and protect more property. That's the whole point.
Definitely.
Yep. All right. So, we kind of alluded to this a little bit before, but kind of the last topic we want to talk to before we jump into questions is all this stuff around demands of these hybrid or multi-platform type situations and what goes on there. I think you've got a good number here in a second that shows that practically more than half of the I don't know if I would agree with this one completely, Erwin, to be honest with you, because I talk to a lot of people that have multiple platforms, and they're trying to solve for 911 with multiple platforms.
So there's a couple of different ways to look at it. What we asked specifically was around phone systems. Did you have more than one? And roughly almost 40% that said that they did. The rest that said they had one. That tends to skew obviously much more to the smaller enterprise. But there are a lot of things these days that count as phone systems. Do you have? Yeah. Are you supporting mobile phones? Do you have a contact center platform that might allow for dial out from contact center agents? So the reality, especially as you get into mid and large size, I don't have this segmented by size, but definitely in the mid to large size, you tend to see a variety of systems, not only more than one provider, but more than one architecture. So a mix of legacy on-prem, along with cloud services that you may be using in some locations. So again, that gets back to what we talked about earlier, is that challenge of consistency across all of the different calling platforms that you have, and making sure that, if you've got a subsidiary using one vendor and another, and the corporate standard is something else, and you've got a contact center using a third, that at any one of those locations, 911 calling essentially functions the same way. And going back to what we started on, is Kerry's Law and Rebounds Act compliant here in the U.S.
Yeah, I can tell. I many times a year we come across a situation where we onboard a customer and we start processing their 911 calls and routing them, and then we start to get these calls, and we don't know what to do with them because there's some phantom endpoint that these calls are coming from. And we start tracing it down with the customer, and they go, "Oh, you know what? That we have sitting over here in this branch office, I forgot that we have that phone system." And so this hybrid thing is a challenge, and so there's a lot that can be done about this. And so these are some of the questions we recommend you ask either your current provider, or if you operate some sort of phone system and you need to get in line here. These are some of the questions we recommend you ask either your current provider, like I said, or as you're evaluating alternate providers and so forth. What goes on here, and the first one here, and Erwin and I, we've talked about this at EC a lot. We've talked about this multiple times over the last several years. Is really, don't do this in a silo. Think about and ask your first responders, what do they need, right? I mean, when we look at Rebounds Act and it says, you have to provide a dispatchable location, there's no standard for what that address line 2 needs to look like. We can help you validate address line 1 all day long. Address line 2, that's where I really encourage people to talk to their first responders and go, hey, this is what we're doing for address line 2. Is that okay? Right? I mean, coffee and donuts with first responders is a good thing.
Yeah, it's something that comes up, like you said, in every one of our Enterprise Connect panels. And this is also, probably missing from this list we talked about earlier, that we're not lawyers, we're not providing legal advice, but as part of this due diligence, talking to lawyers is probably a good idea as well. But yeah, I think you kind of nailed all the areas that people need to be aware of, making sure that you have consistency across locations, across devices, across platforms. Especially a lot of contact center users may not have a dedicated number. So ensuring that you have a viable callback number as required in Kerry's Law is a critical requirement there. Making sure that people are educated and they know what the limitations are. If you're unable to provide routing to a local PSAP for somebody who's working from home, making sure that employees are aware of that is critical as well. And then working with incident response teams if you've got on-site security, on-site fire and rescue, and say a large factory or power plant or something along those lines, that whatever 911 calling platform you have is fully integrated with your emergency response planning.
Yeah, to that point, riffing off points 3 and 4 here, there's a lot of variation out there we see in the marketplace where people sometimes have a phone number, sometimes they don't. With the proliferation of voice over IP, right? Phone numbers are not necessarily required all the time. So, but they are required when you call 911. So having a service in a system, I might know of one that can help you guys who might be listening to this solve all that. But being able to handle endpoints or users that don't have a phone number, there's technology out there that can solve for this. So a lot of good things here. Yeah, think of these questions, of course, when you're trying to solve for your hybrid environments. Okay, we're getting close to the end here, but the final thing here is we want to, I think we want to iterate here is the time to prepare is now. Whether you're preparing for next gen or you're looking for regular, getting in compliance with the regular requirements or anything in between, now is the time to prepare. And final thoughts before we move on to questions here, Erwin.
No, I think, again, planning is everything, to quote President Eisenhower at the time general. You have to have a plan. And I know this is the big challenge we find that organizations struggle with is there's not really an ROI attached to addressing these 911 problems. It's not going to make you more money. It probably won't potentially result in cost savings. It will reduce and eliminate, or maybe not eliminate, but potentially reduce risk and address worker safety. And I think that's really the critical one. One of the points I always try and bring up is we don't talk about a lot in the telecom industry that has life and death implications. This does. So it's not something that you can ignore. Again, consult with legal counsel is always a strong piece of advice, I think. But this is something I think organizations really need to take the time and make sure that they're prepared, they're ready for NG 911, and they have a solid proactive strategy.
Perfect. All right. So we got some time for a few questions we're going to dig into. First, I just want to say thank you. Thanks for attending. And like I said, we've got a few questions. So we're going to go ahead and start our Q&A session. Just a quick reminder, if you have questions, put them into the Q&A box to the right of your screen. And thank you guys very much. So the first question I think we should tackle, Erwin, is, are there international equivalents to Kerry's Law and Raybaum's Act?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any right now. I know there was some talk about having, I think it was a couple of years ago, it was a Kerry's Law type equivalent within Canada, but I haven't heard anything specific to that. I think, again, there is efforts to have NG 911 equivalents in other parts of the world, but I haven't seen any specific laws in either one of, in any place outside the US that would require that same direct dial, dispatchable location information and so on that's associated with Kerry's Law and Raybaum's Act.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think I've seen anything that's critical, but I will say, I think a lot of multinational companies like the idea of what the experience that people get from Raybaum's Act and Kerry's Law, and they're looking to provide that same experience globally at this point. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. One other question is how do I handle 911 calls when the caller location can't be established? And you want me to jump in, or do you want to handle it first?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So when the caller location can't be established, right? The way we handle this, Bandwidth handles this, is that we have a nationwide PSAP. We call it the ECC, which is just the generic term for emergency call center. We just generically call it that. But the idea here is when you have a call that comes across a network like Bandwidth, and we don't know where to route it, we route it to, we don't want to let that call go unanswered. So we route it to our ECC. They're able to answer the call, process it, and then as quick as possible. And I listen, at least every month, I listen to some of these recordings to see what we're doing there. And very quickly, we're able to route that call to the appropriate call center, because they may get incomplete location information. or they may get some good location information. There's a lot of different scenarios that happen, but the bottom line is they're able to do a warm transfer of that call to the appropriate PSAP. And so that's our goal, is never let a 911 call go unanswered. That's just not a good way to do it.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. All right. What can I do about 911 calls placed from within my facilities via a personal mobile device? So that's, again, why don't we take just a minute or two, Erwin, to riff off the whole mobile geofencing thing one more time here.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So, we talked about earlier is the challenge in somebody taking their personal mobile device, or even if it's say in the case of Microsoft Teams phone, a Microsoft registered mobile device, that 911 call is going to get handed off to the carrier in the same fashion as any other 911 call that's handled by a mobile carrier. It will not route through the enterprise phone system. It will not provide on-site notification. It will not know the caller location other than what it can do from triangulating the position of the phone. So it creates essentially a gap in a 911 strategy. And it's a big one because, again, most 911 calls, if I'm in a life and death situation, I'm probably going to reach for my mobile phone first before I'm going to hunt for a desktop phone or wall phone or something like that. So, again, I'll let you talk about the geofencing solutions that are out there, but that's really the best way to go about it.
No, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And there's several different providers, and there's a lot of interesting technology going on now where we can, I could talk about this for hours because there's different technologies that are being used. Whether there's 911 location technologies and there's commercial location technologies, and the bottom line is we want to use the best to be able to track people when they call 911. Because when you dial 911, right, you forego privacy. Once you dial 911. The call becomes public record. You are asking for help, and you need, you got to give up your location to get help. So that's some good stuff going on there. All right. Another question from Sean is for the upcoming PSAP notification requirements, those PSAP alerts. And I try and use the term alert specifically because we talk about Kerry's law notifications, and then we talk about PSAP. Well, I'm proposing we use the term PSAP alerts so that we don't confuse it with Kerry's law notifications. But anyway, for the upcoming PSAP alerts requirements, do we have a product that enables VoIP providers to fulfill these requirements? From a bandwidth perspective, yes, we do. We do. We are really on the verge of releasing all the details around this product, and we want to support our customers and even prospects that really want to meet this regulatory requirement. I think we've got a pretty unique solution. So looking forward to having some in-depth conversations with some of you about what that looks like. Finally, one more question here for the upcoming. I think we've got that one. So there we go. We covered that question. Any other questions that we have here, team? I'm not seeing much, and I think we're about out of time. I'll give it just pause for a couple seconds to see if we have any more questions come in. And it looks like we're good. All right. Well, thanks. That's about all the time we have for today's webinar. Again, I want to give a big thanks to Erwin for joining me and sharing his expertise with us today. We'd love your feedback on today's webinar. Please use the QR code to complete our short survey. Thank you to our audience for joining us and on another Bandwidth webinar. And have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.